Hey guys, this is Kodajit, your best friend in programming, and today I'm going to talk about storing data in an Electron app. So if you're making an Electron app, you're certainly dealing with data and you will want to store it somewhere so that you can retrieve it later. And Electron gives you a couple of options to do that. And as usual, things are a little bit trickier than Electron than any other platform because Electron is divided into two processes, the main process and the renderer process. So the main process runs in the background and deals with all the data loading and processing that you might need to in the background, and the renderer process works on the front end. It's the display area of the app where you load up the HTML, you do all the interactions, and these two processes are protected from each other. So whatever data you're gonna store, they are stored differently at both ends. Now the front end process is a Chrome browser, so it gives you the entire Chrome storage API. That means you have access to session storage, you have access to local storage, and also IndexedDB. All of these are browser-based storage APIs. Session storage is useful when you want to store some data temporarily. As soon as you close your app, the data is gone. Local storage is when you want to persist the data a little bit longer, so the data will still be there when you load the app back up. Now the IndexedDB is more like a NoSQL database. It's a complete database system which is a part of your browser. So you can install pretty complicated objects in there and then even do operations like search, just like you would do on a standard NoSQL database. So that's also an option available to you. And on the back end, the easiest way that you can store data is using JSON flat files. So what you can do is you can create objects containing your data, and you can just persist them to a JSON file, load them up again, load them into an object. And that's pretty good system if you want to persist specific objects or if you want to persist data, but it's not like a complete database. I want to tell you, just because some data is on the renderer process, like in session, local, and IndexedDB, it doesn't mean that you cannot get it in main process. Actually, you can. It's a little bit more complicated, but it's not too difficult. And I'm going to show you that exactly. So hang on with me. Let's get this demo started and learn how to store data in Electron. Let's get started with JSON file. Let's see how to store data and read data from a flat JSON file. To make things more organized, I have set up a test application which we'll be using as a case study. So it's a basic survey app with a lot of questions, things like your name, and you can put in data, and when you press next, it moves you on to the next question, like what's your city, and you can answer all these questions. And what we'll be doing is we'll be saving this data to the hard disk using the JSON file in this particular case. Let's take a look at the HTML before we proceed. So this app is divided into a number of tabs. You can see each tab has a question and has an input box where people can put in the answer, and it's got a name depending on what the input box is about. So it's got all these tabs. Now let's look at the code. If you've been watching my videos, if you've watched other videos from me about Electron, you know by now about things like the renderer process and the main process, and you know how they communicate. You know, on the render process, you've got the front end, you've got the HTML file, and you can have JavaScript running on the front end just as it does on a browser. So this is what this setup is about. It's got a JavaScript file where everything is happening, mainview.js, and if you go to mainview.js, I've got this function called save JSON file, and it is set up to the next previous button. So there is one function that handles next and previous both, and when it's called, depending on the page number that we are on, that we are supposed to go to, it also called save JSON file. And in save JSON file, what we're doing is very simply we are retrieving the data from the input boxes using document.getElementsByName, and we've got six different variables with all the data in there. I'm console logging them just for our benefit so that we can see that they're actually being logged, that they are being collected. And then using a context bridge, we are calling a save data function on the preload from where it will be sent to the main process. Because remember, the render process cannot communicate or cannot use your system resources. It's a browser. To use your system resources, you have to make the request from the main process, right? So when you go to the main process, when you go to the preload file, this is the context bridge. You've got a function called save data, which does nothing but calls IPC renderer and passes it all the data. So in this line, what I've done is I've taken all the different variables, I've taken all the different data points and put it in one collection. And that collection is passed to save data. And using IPC renderer, we call the main process. IPC renderer is used to call the main process, which is in main.js. And you can see now we are trapping this event. We are talking, and in save data, I'm logging it one more time. And then I'm using JSON stringify to convert that data into a string. And then we can just simply write it using write file sync. We can give it a name, just the folder name and the file name and the content that you want to write, and that's it. The file is written. You can see the file over here is written, and to retrieve it back, to bring it back, to read it, you need to do the opposite. That is, read the file first. I'm checking whether it exists or not. Then you can read it using read file synchronous or asynchronous, whichever version you want. And finally use json.parse to read the data into an object. And if you log the object, it's going to be the same text. Let's take a look and see if that actually works. So I'm going to run this app again now. Here we go. And let's fill in the actual data. But first, let's look at data.json. You only have CoderJit. This is what I filled in earlier. And now let's put in some fresh data. CoderJit. And let's check city. So Dubai. What's your favorite shopping site? These days it's Amazon. Favorite car? Oh, I love Jeeps. I've got one. Favorite song? Well, there are a bunch, but let's go for Unstoppable these days. I'm listening to this. And mobile brand, it has to be Samsung. And that's it. So if you write that data correctly, if the code is working correctly, our data.json file should be updated with all this info. You can see it. CoderJit, Dubai, all of this info is written over here, right? And the basic code to write this is in main.js, right over here, write file sync, JSON stringify. But to bring it to the main process, we had to do a little bit of work. Step one, pull the data in the renderer process using a JavaScript file. Step two, take it to the preload file using a context bridge. So we have the step two. And step three, call ipcrenderer.send to send the data to the main process. And step four, write it in the main process. And I do have this entire project as a GitHub repo that's public and it's available. Look in the description to find the links, so that you can read the code yourself and you can use it as a sample. Let's move on to the other three options now. And now it's time to find out how you can store using the session storage and local storage. The important thing about session storage and local storage is that both of these storage systems are on the renderer process. So you can't call them in the main process directly. You'll have to call them in the front end, in the browser, in the renderer process. So right over here. And you can send the information back to the main process using IPC communications. And if you are new to IPC communications, I have a video on that. You can find it on my channel. You can also pull up data from the main process and send it to session storage and local storage again using IPC communications. Let's get started and see how it works. So in this survey form, let me show you a phenomena. I put in my name here, CoderJit, and then move to next, and I can put in my city. If you go back, you will see that my name is still being displayed, but if I reload the page, the name is gone because the data is not stored. So we're going to try and solve this problem using session storage and local storage And let's see if we can get this name to persist. So we are now in main.html, the interface, and if you scroll to the bottom, you will find the file mainview.js. That is the JavaScript file that is dealing with the interface, that's controlling all of the interface. And if you open it, you got all these functions like show tab, and there is a next previous button. We've already dealt with it before for save JSON file. And what I want to do extra now is to store this in a session or a local storage. So I'm going to start with session. Let's just call it save info, and we'll need to create a new function. And now we can refer to the session storage on the window object. So session storage is an object related to the window object, and you can call session storage dot set item to save anything you want. Let us save all of these details in the session storage. So I'll just take it out, put it all over here, and then window dot session storage dot set item. Alright, so we are saving all this data in the session storage every time the next or the previous button is pressed. We've written the code to set it, but we also need to restore it, and we'll do that in the load event, in the document content loaded event. So this time we'll call load info, another function, and it's very easy. We'll just do the reverse of here. We're going to pull the data instead of setting it. And copy it over. All right, so we've got all the info that we saved earlier into these properties, into these variables. Now the thing is, if there is nothing over here, we're just gonna get empty strings, and that's perfectly okay. Let's set the actual value of the input boxes. We're gonna use document.getElementsByName dot value, and we're gonna set it to the value that we have here. We're gonna repeat that. All right, so all of that is done, and now the data is being pulled from session storage and set on the input boxes. Let's see if it works, and after we reload, this time do we see the actual content. So I'm going to load up the terminal again. Here is our survey form. Go to Jeet, press next, and reload page, and you can see that you've got Code Jeet over here. Let's try another thing. Dubai, go back, and it should be saved. So you can see Dubai right over here, but we haven't reloaded yet. Reload, we see Code Jeet over here, and if it's saved in the session storage, we'll see Dubai over here. So this is being loaded using the load info function. And how do we test it, whether it's working or not? Let's just comment it out, and let's see what happens. So again, Code Jeet, go next, go back, and this time it's here, but we haven't reloaded, and if we reload, it's gone. I will have you notice one thing. When I run this project, you will see that it starts out with an empty form. This time there is no name to start with. So if I put in my name here again, I go back and I go back again, I reload it, and the name's still there, but when I actually close the app and I restart it, the name is gone. So the session storage, like I told you earlier, will persist the data only till the lifetime of the app. Once the app closes, the session storage will be cleared, and all the data that you stored in there will be cleared. What if you want to retain the data across app loads? You want to save some data and have it back even after you start the app 2 days, 3 days, or even longer later. So to do that, what you need is the local storage, and it works just like the session storage. Let's see it in action. Let's rename this function to load session info, just so that we can differentiate between local storage and session storage. And this time, when we are saving the data in save info, let's call it save session info 2, in fact. And so we're going to comment out the save session info and load session info functions. I'm leaving them in this project so that you can check it out in the repository and use it if you need to. We're going to create a couple of new functions. save local info, and let's just copy this over. Here's the new function, save local info. And this time, instead of saving it on the session storage, we're just gonna save it on the local storage. So they work pretty much the same. The entire system is the same. Just replace the name with local storage and you will have the data stored to the local storage. So we're gonna repeat this again. Create the new function, load local info. Here we go. And again, instead of session storage, local storage. So now we are storing the data in the local storage and also restoring it or retrieving it from the local storage. Let's run it and see what changes. The first time we run the app, there is no data in the local storage and this is empty. So we'll write code Ajit. We'll press next just to save it to the local storage. Come back, still here of course. We're going to reload and you can see it's still here. I'm going to close the app, run the app again, and you can see the data is still here. So we can press next. I'm going to fill in the cd name too. All right, so that's about it. Reload, and you should see all this data over here. Close the app, restart, and all this data is still here. So local storage is going to persist your data across app loads, and there is no real expiration date. You will be able to remove this data manually, of course, using the remove item method, but otherwise this data is going to persist. And finally, we have IndexedDb. This is a complete NoSQL dataset, kind of like MongoDB, which is a part of your browser, and in this case, your Electron app. Now, IndexedDB is something that I don't advise you to use unless you are storing complete datasets and need to store some non-trivial data. It's not suitable for just key value pairs. You can use local storage for that. But in this case, I am going to show you how to use IndexedDB because we want to complete this demo and we want to explore all the systems. Now, to make using IndexedDB easy, because it's a promise-based architecture database, it's very hard to use it otherwise. We are using a library called IDB. This is the Node.js library and you can install it in Node using npm. But in this case, we're going to use it with browser and it's suitable for that. There is a script that you will need to refer to. So I have done exactly that. In my main HTML, just before the mainview.js, I have referred to the CDN file, which will give me access to IDB. And inside my main view, I have to write a lot of code to make IndexedDB work. Now this is a database, so you will have to open the database. So in DOM content loaded, I'm first opening the database. This is the opening code, await idb.opendb, and the database name that I am opening in this instance is settings. You can have multiple database on the same website, so just refer to it by names. This is my store, settings store. And when you run the database for the first time, you might need to create it. So there is the upgrade command which will execute only if an upgrade is needed. And the second line I'm calling is load IndexedDB info. That is the actual function where the database is being loaded. And DB is coming from IDB. You can see that I created instead of IDB using the OpenDB command, idb.opendb. The DB object I have declared at the top, and I can use it all across this file, all across this module. So I am using db.get to get fname data key value pair. It's a key value store from the settings database. So I'm loading up all the settings in a similar manner: city, site, car, song, and mobile. All of the data is being loaded over here. And finally, I am assigning that data to the input boxes on the screen. Now, while saving the data, it's the reverse function, of course. I have created a function called save IndexedDB info, and in that function, I'm first retrieving the data from the input boxes and then saving it to the database using another asynchronous function called put, which is again a part of the IDB library, and I'm saving it to the settings database. This is the actual setting, and finally the setting name. So this way you can set and retrieve settings from IndexedDB, but like I said earlier, this is an overkill for this particular case because you should use it when you have a lot of data. But let's test it anyway. So I'm gonna put in some data next and put in the city name and then put in my shopping website. And finally, let's just close it and check it again if it actually works. Here we are. You can see that the data is still here. And if you will notice the code, we have already commented out session info and load local info, and we are only using load IndexedDb info to retrieve this data. So all of this is actually coming from the IndexedDb. Now this concludes our training on storing data in Electron. I hope you enjoyed this lesson as much as I enjoyed creating it. And if you want to stay connected to me, do subscribe. I do make a lot of videos on technology, on programming across multiple technologies. So subscribe and I will be coming to you again with a new video on programming. This is Coder Jeet, your best friend in programming, signing off.